Welcome back, guys. Let's get another one going. Here we go. All right, guys, so here's what we got tonight. We have some stainless steel tubing that we need to weld some sanitary fittings on. If you don't know what sanitary fittings are, I'll show you right now. That's a sanitary fitting right there. You can see there's a little groove on the inside. There's a rubber seal that sits in this, and then there's two of them that made up together, and then there's a clamp that goes on here, and you can see that they're tapered. And so when you tighten that hand clamp down, it's just got a little T-handle on it. You tighten that down and that wedge actually pulls those together and tightens that up, puts pressure on the seal, and it can hold quite a bit of pressure. These are used a lot in the food industry, among other things, but that's one of the reasons they call it a sanitary fitting, is because they're stainless steel and they are used in the food industry a lot. So these here are what we're going to be welding on tonight. We've got some tubing here. Here's our tubing. You can see I already have sanitary fitting on one end, but I need to square this up and then weld a sanitary fitting on 3 sections of tubing. On Monday, I've got to go into the facility where these belong, and I've got to do 2 field welds in there, and then they'll be back in business as far as this goes. Tonight, we're going to see if we can't get these knocked out. We do have a new tool in the shop that I think is going to help us make it look a little more professional. It should be quicker, cleaner. It's another one of those milestones, that something I've always wanted. I've had it for a while in the shop here. I've used it several times. I just haven't put out a video on it yet. So tonight you guys will get to see what that is. So I'll show you what that is right now.
It's time for today's super cool tool.
All right, so here's what we got. This is a Profax weld positioner. And if you don't know what a weld positioner is, it's basically a DC motor. It's got a control panel on it and a chuck. You can chuck cylindrical materials, round materials. You can even chuck square materials on this turntable. There's a handle over here that you can crank, and you can move that turntable so it doesn't go 180. It looks like it goes more than 90, but less than 180. So the 3 main positions that you would probably use this machine is 90, 45, and 0. And when I say 0, where the turntable is perpendicular, up and down. So it's been pretty handy having it in the shop so far. Once I've used it for a duration of time, I'll be able to give you guys a review on what I think of it, on how I like this brand, how I like this specific setup. This is not a real big weld positioner, but it will handle quite a bit of weight. I will put the specs up on the screen and show you guys what it's capable of. You can pause and review and go through the price and weight, capacity, and all that stuff if you'd like. I'll put that on the screen right now. So as you can see, it's got an on-off, it's got remote or panel. If you put it on panel, it will just run to whatever you set it on. It has a foot pedal, so if you put it on remote, it runs off the foot pedal. It's got forward, off, and reverse. There's a fuse here for if you blow a fuse, you can just swap that out to protect the electrical components inside of this. It runs on 110. This specific weld positioner has a 1-inch through hole, so if you're doing small bore pipe, 1 inch or less, it will slide through the chuck. I've welded quite a few things with it and I like it so far. The one thing I have not done with it yet is use the pulse on the Miller Dynasty with this machine, and that's what we're going to do tonight. So I'll show you guys the rest of the setup here, and we'll talk about how I'm going to get this tubing set up. All right, so we've got our weld positioner here. This is just one of the roller heads from one of my pipe stands. I've actually cut a little bit off to where it's the same height as the chuck. And then it will fit into this piece of square tube. So I can drop it in here. I can tack this square tube to the table and get the exact height that I need. Now, once I get the square tube tacked to the table, I'll take our tubing. So I've got the tubing in the chuck. Now if I push on the pedal, it rolls the tubing. The rollers help support it on the end. I'll be able to set up my rest over here and just set my TIG torch on here and run pulse. I'm gonna purge the tubing. That's the other reason the through hole is nice on the chuck, is I can run a purge hose through there and purge this from the back end if I need to. We will purge this. It's stainless steel tubing. I believe it's 1.25 inch, and weld these joints up, or at least that's my hope. So one of the first things I want to do is I want to take this tubing. You can see it's not real square. So we're going to throw this in the lathe. We're going to part it off, square it up, and then we'll come back over here. We'll get everything prepped up to where the joint is perfect. One of the hardest parts about welding sanitary fittings and tubing like this, thin-walled stainless steel tubing, is you want your joint to be as tight as possible. We're not gonna do a bevel on this. We're gonna run pulse. We're gonna purge it. We'll just let the torch do the work to be able to penetrate this and give us a good sound weld that will not leak. So that's the plan. Let's go over to the lathe and I'll show you guys what I got going over there. So we've got our lathe slowed down pretty good. We're running about 85 RPMs. We're going to use some cutting oil here, and we got our part off tool in the lathe. This might be a little noisy. See how it goes. All right, hopefully you can see that. I'll give you a close-up shot of how square that is and how clean it is. I'm gonna use my little reaming tool here, but I don't wanna get too aggressive, so I'm just gonna barely take the burr off the inside of this. I don't wanna get too rough with it. Okay, that's good. Okay, so there's what she looks like. You see, that's nice and true, square, good and clean. We're gonna go ahead and wipe this out, spray it down with some acetone. We're also gonna hit it with some Scotch-Brite just to clean it up and get our joint nice and prepped. Make sure we clean the surface of that. So we'll go back over to the table and I'll show you how I'm gonna tack these up. All right, so I do have one here that I need to cut and add a little bit of length to. So I do have a piece of tubing here for filler, but I do need to cut this sanitary fitting off. So I'm going to take my pipe wrap. I'm going to go ahead and mark this. Unfortunately, the flange on these fittings is too big to fit through the headstock on the lathe. We will be able to put it in the lathe after we cut it and square it up, prep the joints. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this, probably with a portaband, and then we'll clean it up on the lathe. Okay, we'll go ahead and clean this up on the lathe. We'll clean this one up on the lathe, get those all prepped, and then all of our sections will be prepped and ready to go. We'll jump over to our weld positioner. I'll bring you back and I'll show you what I got the settings on the welder. All right, we're gonna clean this up with some Scotch-Brite. And then I'm just cleaning this up on the inside with just one of these little flappers for my die grinder. Okay, now I'm going to show you how perfect this joint is. Hopefully you can see that, but there is no gap there, like virtually zero. Perfectly machined surface on both ends. They're cleaned up. I am going to wipe this down with acetone before I start, just to make sure it's nice and clean. And then we'll get our welder set up. I'll show you guys the settings. All right, we've got our hose run through here. Now I'm not going to be able to go super tight with this tape because I don't want it to start twisting the hose while I'm trying to weld. So I am going to have to leave it just a little bit loose, which is fine. It'll be fine. Using some frog tape here for all you frog tape lovers. Go ahead and crank that down. Now I do want to test this to make sure that it's going to spin freely. The purge hose, that is. Okay, I think we're going to be good. So I still got to hook up my bottle for my purge. Go ahead and do that. And then I am going to tack this piece of tube to the table to keep this from rocking or moving or whatever. Okay, our purge is running. We're going to let that run for a minute before we start welding. I do have a piece of tape holding this on, and the joint is actually perfect. So I'll be able to tack this and then pull my tape off. And then I'm going to go ahead and get my pulse set up here. I haven't done this yet. So pulse. Pulser on. Pulses per second. We probably want, I'm going to start with 2 pulses per second. So when you get below 10, it goes to decimal. But we are going to do, what the heck, let's go with 3. Okay, so we set it 3 pulses per second. Peak on time. So there's percent peak on time, and it's set to 40, and it says increasing raises average amperage and creates a more fluid puddle. Decreasing lowers average amperage and creates a less fluid puddle. Let's go to 70%. Background amperage. We're going to keep that at 25%. Pulse wave shape. Holy smokes. I didn't even know it had this. Slower transition rates between background and peak amperage. More fluid puddle is good for overlay applications, which is what we're doing, and it's called quiet pulse sine. Quiet pulse triangle, square. We'll go quiet pulse sine. What the heck? Let's try it. We're on DC TIG, 332 tungsten. I've got the welder set to 35 amps. Let's see how this goes. I think that's everything. Our bottle's on. Everything should be good. All right, let's try it. Definitely got a learning curve here. I'm going to go ahead and get a couple tacks on this real quick. So let's see how this goes. Okay, so first impression, I think 35 amps is a little on the light side. We'll see what it looks like once I really get rolling, but it seems on the light side. Okay, that's about 180. We'll put another tack. Make sure our joint's close to perfect. Okay, so I think it's definitely on the light side. I'm gonna go up to 45 amps. This is kind of scary. We're gonna go ahead and try this. I probably should have ran a test on a spare piece, but you know what they say. If you're gonna be a bear, be a grizzly. So here we go. I'll go ahead and I'm gonna have to set this on run. So I'll put it on panel and it will run. And now I'm gonna try it, see how it goes. Holy crap, that's freaking awesome. Now, I am a little concerned about what kind of penetration it had because it seemed on the cold side. So So I want to shine a flashlight in there and see what kind of penetration I got. I'm probably gonna have to run another one over the top of it, turn my heat up and find that sweet spot, but it looks awesome. All right, so looks like it wasn't enough penetration. Got our foil tape on there. Now, purge is still running. I've got to figure out this amperage, and I think it's peak amps. So if we were to go 60, we need it to be able to penetrate. So I'm going to go over the top of this and see how it goes. Here we go. Okay, so I think that turned out pretty good. And I think that got a lot better penetration. So that was 60 amps on my peak amps. Now remember, I've got it set to 70% of peak, so whatever 70% of 60 is, that's what it was running. Still not quite there. So I think if we adjust our peak, or 85, let's go 85. And I may have to run one more. I'm gonna let this cool a little bit before I do, but I'll show you guys real quick what it looks like. It looks great right now, I think, but it's just not penetrated all the way through. But I'll show you guys what it looks like. So there's what it looks like. It's pretty dang, I mean, it's a pretty weld. It's good color. There's no discoloration from heat or anything like that. So it looks good. It's just not quite as penetrated as I want it to be. So we've got to tweak it a little bit. And once we start seeing it penetrate from the inside, then we'll know we've hit the sweet spot. So we'll keep playing with it and see what happens. All right, guys, good news. I think I got it figured out. I've got another piece here in the chuck. I've got the purge on. I'm just getting ready to tack this next fitting. I'll show you guys what we ended up with. Turned out pretty good. The inside looks awesome. It did penetrate. I'm running at 70 peak amps. On the pulse, I'm running it at 85% on the peak time, and then on the back end, 25%. So those are my settings. It seems to be working pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and tape up this end, let it purge for a minute, and then we'll go ahead and run it. And I'm pretty happy with how it's turning out. Once you get this figured out, I'm sure this is a huge time saver because you're able to be more efficient. Throw it in the chuck. Once your settings are done, you throw your pipe in the chuck. Just set your torch up on here, hit the pedal, and run it. And it takes a matter of 30 seconds to run a weld, so pretty cool. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this tacked on. If I didn't mention it before, I am using a Furic number 14 Jazzy cup, and I love these Furic cups. They're expensive, but they are awesome. This cup gives a lot of coverage. You can see how big that cup is, especially for stainless, because you want good gas coverage. It is a game changer. So we'll go ahead and get our joint right on here, and then we'll get this tacked. Okay, so I'm just giving it enough to give it a little teeny tack. I think we're good there. So I'm gonna go ahead and go 90 degrees, and I'll start. I don't want to start on my tack. Sometimes you can heat up your tack and it will bust loose, and then you end up with a gap, and then your flange is crooked, so we don't want that. So we're gonna go 90 degrees, and then we'll run it. So I'm gonna get all set up here, right how I want it. Okay. fire in the hole. So I'm just mashing the pedal to the floor and just going for it. Here we go. Okay, you can tell by looking at this that it is definitely penetrating. Pretty stinking happy with how that turned out. And then penetration wise, perfect. Perfect. Like I always say, first one's the worst one, but we've got this dialed now. So I'll go ahead and show you what it looks like. Hopefully you can see the ripples there. Turned out awesome. And I don't know if you can see, hopefully you can see the penetration, maybe not. Let me see if I can get my light, shine it in there. Can you see that? Hopefully you guys can see that root in there, but it's perfect. So it penetrated the whole way. Happy with how it looks. Nice and clean. We'll probably clean it up with some Scotch-Brite. So we got one more to do. I'm gonna go ahead, start getting it prepped up, and then we'll run it. All right guys, we're on the last one. I've got my pieces all prepped up. I got a piece cut here, faced off. Everything's good and squared, cleaned up. I do need to clean this one up with some Scotch-Brite. Stainless can be a bear to tack because it likes to move. Okay, we're good and tacked. I like how it looks. Our joints are tight. And go ahead and tape up the end of this. We'll let it sit for a minute and purge, and then we'll run these two welds. This foil tape, I like it for the end pieces on this because it's good and sticky. Gives you a good seal. And then usually I'll just take and poke a little hole in the end of this so that it can push the gas through. All right, so we'll let that run for just a minute, and then we'll go ahead and run these welds. So we will get these cleaned up with some Scotch-Brite, and then we'll show you what our finished product was. All right guys, I'm going to show you what we got here. I got this last piece cleaned up. You can't hardly even see the weld joint. And the root looks awesome. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but. So pretty happy with that. It was cool to be able to use the Dynasty and use the pulse. It was neat to be able to use the weld positioner the way we did. That's the first time I've used pulse and the weld positioner in that manner, so that was pretty cool. Pretty happy with how they turned out. So I do have 2 field welds I'll have to make to get these installed and back up in operation. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. This was also something different. I enjoyed it because I learned a ton doing it. I learned a ton setting up the welder on pulse and also using it in correlation with the weld positioner. So that's gonna wrap this one up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks again for watching. See you on the next one. If you don't know what sanitary fitting's on, because on Monday I've got to go into the facility on Monday. All right, so here's what we got. This is a Profax. What hell model is this? The three main positions that you would use this is probably 180. We'll just let the torch do the work and give us the penetration we need to be able to get a good